afternoon, I guess evening now. We're not afternoon.
7:30.
It is 7:30 on Wednesday, and we want to welcome you to Table Talk this time around, and we just are glad that you've tuned in. And you know what? I forgot my coffee out in the foyer, but
Did you?
yep, I did.
Didn't make a coffee, so
I made a
we're
coffee and got it ready.
after, I
Yeah,
guess.
well, drink it after. Hopefully you grabbed the coffee and you're
Yes.
tuned in with us, and thank you again for joining us. My name is Geoff,
I'm Helen.
and we're coming to you live from the Estevan Church of God Studios, 1920 Wellick Road.
That's where we're at.
We've been enjoying these table talks. This is number 29. Table talk number 29. You betcha, 29. So we've talked a lot of different subjects and different thoughts.
A lot.
Yeah, you betcha, absolutely. And
Good.
it's been good hearing your comments and just some of the things that you're working through in your own life as you're walking through some of the conversations. One of the purposes is we want to have conversation on everyday life.
And we love having feedback from you.
Absolutely, yep.
Know what it's doing.
Yep.
If you're taking in some tools and actually it's working for you.
One of the things I said many times was oftentimes we get inundated with truth and good concepts and things like that, and as a result of that, we can not have it really applied to our life because it really doesn't register. And
We load up with ammunition, but we're never using it.
right on. And so one of the things, the purposes of these table talks is to have everyday life conversations about stuff that helps you and helps us. Sometimes in our journey, we learn things and we can pass on to you and vice versa, because I think our life is important and valuable, and our experiences are important. They don't always define who we are, but they give us a platform in which we can grow and develop and learn. And that's what life's all about, is growing and learning and developing.
That's something that we've talked about it in a few different.
Absolutely, we have, yeah.
But growing is a part of life.
That's right,
It
yeah.
is, and we can grow from every situation that we find ourselves in and every relationship that we have.
We've talked about all along our table talks that we're not interested in doing a quick fix thing, but living life. We've talked about some really important subjects, and sometimes we've skimmed through it a little bit just to give you tidbits of stuff, and then we've taken time and actually just stopped and actually took time to talk about it and work it through. And so we're dealing with a subject here that we started several weeks ago. We called it Life 101.
Real life.
Real Life 101. And again, the idea is to grab hold of things that we go through, how to capitalize on those things, how we can best learn, and how we can learn to thrive in sometimes circumstances and situations where we don't.
And relationships.
Absolutely.
Because we're built for that.
And that's what we're talking about here. And you said a good thing when we started the series, is why relationships. And I said the reason why I think relationships are important is because we have been designed for relationships. And that's why sometimes we have difficulties with relationships, because we deal with hurt, we deal with disappointment, we deal with they're not understanding how I think, and as a result there is conflict. I have a poker chips here, and we've left them on the table as a symbol that relationships aren't a gamble. Oftentimes we feel like it. It's almost like we're willing to put so and so much on the table, and then we want to see how it produces. And then we'll put a little bit more on the table to see yes. And part of relationships that I want to remove the stigma that it is a gamble. I would rather say relationships are a risk. They are a risk, but they're not a gamble. A gamble is you just throw it in and you hope for the best and whatever comes. Relationships are different. Risky things are not necessarily negative.
Right.
Risky things are you're calculated, you're purposed, you're weighing things out and things like that. And that's often, I think, the heart of relationships is risky because, yes, there's opportunities where we do get hurt. Without a question, we do get hurt.
All been there.
And sometimes you get downright burnt. And one of the dangers often when it comes to relationships, whether it's marriage relationships or significant others in your life, or where it's work or whatever the context of it, all life is about relationships, and some will be deeper than others. And as a result of that, sometimes the risk factor is there that we can get burnt and hurt and whatever else. And the danger is when we get hurt, because of the risk, we push yourself away, and that's not healthy. We need to learn to pull through and push through some of those things.
Honey, like thinking of our journey,
Yes.
we've been together 28 years married. it has been a hell of a journey. Some of it has been
Yeah.
a hell of a journey.
Absolutely.
Just to be real.
Yeah.
And you know what? I am so thankful that we actually pushed through some of the really hard stuff of not understanding each other, our expectations,
Yeah, that's right,
our
yeah.
own failures, and how we've been hurt. Because there is something on the other side of pushing through.
And I think we have to emphasize that,
Yes.
because when you're going through stuff, you don't see the other side.
No.
You just see the walls, you see the conflict, you see the struggle and the frustration, and then you start working through in your mind, is it worth it?
And you know what? Even to say, because we've pushed through a lot of stuff, and we've been I feel like we've had such a good reward
Yeah.
from the investment that we've made.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always look like that.
No, it doesn't, right?
Sometimes there is divorce, there is separation, there is so much brokenness
Right.
from the relationship that people want.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And that's a reality. And the thing is, you can thrive
Yes.
even after that brokenness.
Absolutely it is, yeah.
What we've gone through, there is a place where we can enjoy life with relationships.
Our past never has to define our future.
Yes.
And sometimes we allow our past to influence our future, and then we look at it as a gamble rather than a risk. And greater the risk, greater the reward. And sometimes it's about learning how personalities work. It talks about communication, expectation. That's kind of what we talked about the last little bit as well, is we talked about real life 101, talking about relationships. The first thing we talked about was communication, how important communication is in the whole scheme of relationships, or the building of relationships. That's a better word. Then we talked about expectations, and how if we don't communicate our expectations, it sets us up for disappointment. It sets us up for frustration. The third thing we talked about was trust, a big one. Relationship is built on trust. We talked about how important trust is. It's hard to build, but it seems to be very easy to be destroyed. And sometimes when these three things are affected, they halt us in moving forward. And how the purpose of some of these talks have been to not let that hold you hostage, but learn through it, because everything is a process. The fourth thing we talked about was
Personality.
That was a big one. All of these have been big in their way.
So good.
But we talk about personalities and how we're wired different, and how we do things different, and how we process things different. And part of healthy relationships in a scope of realm is understanding that.
Yeah.
And if we want to thrive in relationships, in life in general, we have to understand these four things are key in that aspect. And we have to look at those things and examine how we can capitalize on those things.
I was just thinking, because I actually went to McD's for supper today. Fast food, we love it. We love our relationship with fast food, but we can't do that with relationships. You can't
Right.
go through a drive-through, get a little bit of a taste, and then we think this relationship is going to be awesome.
Yes.
It doesn't work like that.
No,
We
it doesn't.
can't build a relationship like a fast food industry. It
It's
is
something
not
that's
a quick
built,
fix. It
and
is
something that's cultivated and worked on.
investment and purpose.
Absolutely. And it's not always about you invest in me, but we have to invest in you and work those things. The fifth thing we want to talk about today, this is an interesting one too, and really dynamic when it comes to relationships, and that's the idea of love languages. I don't like the word love languages, but I'm not sure what better word we could use. It really describes how we, not how we're wired, but what we value, what speaks the most to us. And that's beyond personality and that kind of stuff. It's more the nit and gritty of what do I value, or it explains a lot of how I treat people, what I do, because of how I express myself. And those are important aspects. And we want to look at 5 of them today. And then we want to just briefly go through the 5. This is like we did last time with the trust issue, and with the what was the last one we did? Personality.
Because me and you are very different.
Yes, we are, and how we've worked through that, and how that's actually become a positive thing rather than a negative thing. But there are 5 primary love languages, and as we describe some of these things, I think you'll understand, that's why I do what I do, and that's why I expect that from other people. When they don't give it to me, I feel left out, or I feel like I'm not valued or important. And so,
And I think that was key, because when you speak the right language,
yeah.
It's going to make the other person feel safe and valued.
Because we talked about a little bit before we get to the studio how we both did not feel safe at times in our life because some things are not being met. I'm good at finding ways of what doesn't meet my needs, but I'm weak in the areas how to meet other people's needs and how to contribute to the relationship, because the relationship isn't just take.
Yep.
It's also give. And working through that aspect. So we want to go through the 5 different languages that we can speak of how to make our relationships effective in what we do. And so language number 1 is words of affirmation. Words of affirmation. How would you capulate that word?
It's for me, it would be just like affirming through words is you build that person up. You recognize and say, you are really good at this. You're looking really good today.
Yeah.
That's something.
Or acknowledging when things are going right and saying, hey, I appreciate you looking after that, or thanks for looking, or thanks for doing that.
Yes.
Many times in relationship breakdown, whether it is in the home, outside the home, workplaces, is we don't hear that enough. And sometimes if you're not wired that way, that's not important to you.
That's right. You don't recognize.
But if you think that's important, you are always affirming and always that aspect of it, but it means nothing to me because it's not what I value. It's not what makes me energized. It doesn't get me feeling fulfilled at all. But that's where the aspect of learning how each other are wired and how we can help each other along or learn what the other person's perspective is. And so words of affirmation are constantly affirming what you're doing. Thank you for this. I know what it's like to always have the negative. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. That just deflates people.
And you know what? That's what was interesting, because as I was just thinking about this a little bit, with the words of affirmation, is that something that really makes you feel valued and appreciated? The opposite is also true. When the words are
not
opposite,
there,
or that was a dumb thing to do. If there's an opposite of that affirmation, it's gonna trigger them.
That's right.
Deep place of the heart.
That is a good point. It's going to trigger.
Yes.
So if you're wired that way and you hear the negative, it's going to go against you.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel like a failure. There's nothing you can do right.
Yes.
So affirmation, words of affirmation is one of those. The second language that we speak oftentimes is acts of service, where you do things. We call people like that often doers. They're always involved. They're always doing stuff. They're always doing this and doing that because that's how they see value. And there's nothing wrong with any of these languages. It's helping us understand how we work through life and how we see value. And so the second one is acts of service, where you volunteer for this, volunteer for that. It's almost like it just it gives you fuel. But when someone isn't like that, when we expect others to be that way, then we often get disappointed and say, why aren't people helping? Why aren't people
doing my dishes? Why isn't he cleaning my house?
Yeah, if you're the house cleaner, I guess.
No, I'm just thinking of acts of service, or like even at the workplace, just different place of helping with doing.
Yeah. Why don't you clean? There's so many things that we can talk about, but it's acts of service. And again, the idea, I think I've said it before, if you're wired that way in someone else, that has a potential of conflict. Because oftentimes, we expect the other person to feel the same way as we do. And we understand that they speak a different language. And just like going to a foreign country where languages are significant, you can be speaking the most beautiful words and doing the right stuff, but if they don't understand what you're speaking, it's not going to mean anything. And so let's never assume that the other person understands. Let's never assume that everybody thinks the way we do, because it's not going to work out. It's going to be potential for conflict. But that's acts of service.
Yes.
Why aren't you doing anything? You got to be doing something.
Because you can anything when you're wired that way. It makes you feel valued and appreciated when somebody does something for you and you didn't even ask them.
Right, because that's how you're feeling it.
When
Yeah.
they're not doing it right away, you assume, I'm not valuable to them.
That's right. Yeah.
True. It depends on how we're wired.
And that's the neat thing about relationships, because this thing is cultivated and grown, and The third one we want to just briefly talk about a little bit is receiving gifts. A person that speaks the language of receiving gifts, they love when things are bought for them, or when they're thought of and they're presented with something, when they come home or go to work and you receive something. And we just love gifts. That really speaks value to us. I had a funny story. When I was in the military, I was gone for 2.5 months, and I just assumed, I thought this would be a great idea. I was going to phone the florist and have flowers sent to you every week that I'm gone. And so I thought this was the greatest thing in the world. I thought she is going to love this. And so every week I phoned the florist and had a rose delivered to her for every week that I was gone. And when I hung up the phone and ordered that, to me it was like, yes, that's my way of saying I'm thinking of you. I value you. I think it's important. And I remember that, I wasn't going to mention it. And then every time we'd phone on the call, I was waiting to hear if you've gotten something. And I wouldn't hear anything. I'm like, okay, this is week 3. You should have got 3 roses this week. And nothing. And so finally I asked you, I said, did you not get anything? And she said, oh yeah, someone dropped off some flowers. I said, yeah, I'm sending you 1 flower a week for every week that I'm gone, just because I want you to know I'm thinking of you. And that wasn't a big deal to you.
Yes, it wasn't.
And I'm like...
I was just getting a little bit irritated and resentful, honey, because I want you to be home. Because I love quality time. And sometimes when that was lacking, I'm like, those roses don't connect me to you. I want you home.
Yeah.
And so my heart was broken because that was my way of, that was my love language.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm like, I'm missing out here. I don't have my hubby.
And I'm thinking, I'm giving you, because this is what I value. This is the language I speak, because I love gifts. I love things bought from me. I love that aspect. It shows value, I find. Now, all of these, we have to understand, have to have balance. These things don't define us, but they just show us how we are wired so that we can learn from each other. And so I remember being disappointed. I thought, that's it. I'm not going to send her anything anymore.
And that's sometimes the reaction. Just
it is
real.
absolutely.
They're not appreciating what I'm doing for them.
And I thought that she is just not appreciating this, and so as a result, I thought.
But guess what? Now, when you bring me a Timmy's to work, I appreciate it. Because now I'm like, you're thinking of me.
That's right. And so that's receiving gifts and understanding how that works. And so the fourth one is quality time. This is where you really thrive. You love quality time. It's not so much the amount of time, but it's the quality time.
And you know what? Even with me and you or all of my friends, no, I love being with them.
Yeah.
I love just even one-on-one coffees. I love...
She is not a big phone talker because it's like, I can't connect. It's a phone, isn't it?
I apologize if you call me, because most of the time I won't answer because I don't want to talk on the phone. I want to see you.
And see, for somebody like me, it's like to me, I would prefer a text or even a phone call, because then it takes time away and I have to go do. And it's just how we're working through that whole idea. But if I know that's what you value, then I won't phone you. I'll stop in at work and I'll say hi to you or whatever. Again, it seems like we're leaning to, a marriage relationship, and although that's a reality, and that's something we need to be talking about too, because there's that's a huge stress point.
I mean, it can be with friendships. It can also be with your kids. Parents,
yes,
like
absolutely.
A father with a son. It is
because sometimes our kids.
Because it affects you.
Absolutely, because if I have a son that doesn't value gifts, and I value gifts, and so I bring them gifts to show you, hey, I'm thinking of you, and that doesn't mean nothing to them. It's not a big deal. It's like, so what? and then I can get hurt or I can get frustrated because can't you see I'm sacrificing for you? But if we're not speaking the same language or understand the language, we can be upset, we can be hurt. But when we recognize, no, they just don't understand that language, and if I care enough for my son or my daughter, I'm going to find out what their language is, and I want to learn to speak their language. And I know if I spend quality time with my son, that is most valuable. If I stop in, even for 10 minutes, but give him 10 minutes, that shows value. And so then I have to learn as a dad, that's the best way to connect with my son or my daughter or friends or that aspect. And as a result of that, then I leave an impact. I make an impact. And the hardest thing for me was to understand how other people speak, because I just assumed this is how they speak. And I was wondering why I was running into conflict all the time, because we weren't speaking the same language. Or it wasn't that we were speaking the same language, is we weren't understanding the language that was being communicated. Because if I don't care enough for the next person, I'm not going to care what their language is. I'm going to do what I think, and they can take it or leave it. And that's where we have to learn. It's not about bringing my language to the table, but it's understanding how other people speak and what's the best way I can communicate I value them.
And you know what? That's going to take some work.
Absolutely, it's going to take some work. Yep.
Sometimes when you're learning a new language like you are, it takes a little bit more than just like winging it.
Absolutely.
You're going to have to learn to understand a different language.
Absolutely.
How to communicate it so it's going to
And there's things, I think there's things when you're learning a language, because I'm in school right now, I'm learning another language, I'm studying New Testament Greek, and what you don't realize is you take your own language for granted because you don't pay attention to it, because you just know it, you've been exposed to it, you learn it. And so when you're learning another language, it forces you to slow down and begin to look at what is important. How does that sentence flow? Because if I don't read it right, it's not going to be understood right. And so the whole heart of relationships isn't just me. It's about the others around me. And if I value other people around me, I'm going to take the time to learn the language so that I can best communicate my value to people that are around me. So quality time. The last one is physical touch. That's where people want personal contact. They want acknowledgement. And
they feel connected and safe.
Yeah.
When there is just that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, understanding that if you're not a touchy person, and that person around you is, I'm not saying going and touching everybody. The idea is attention and value. And so many times I have to watch myself, because I can get into a conversation and my mind can be at 3-4 different other places. And I've had people say, "You're not here, are you?" Because I'm picking points and I'm not engaging in the conversation. And now I'm learning, and I've learned and still learning, that no, when I'm here, I'm purposed. I'm giving attention because I want the other person around me to feel that I value them.
I was just thinking of quality time, just one step back, because I'm a quality time person. Honey, can you put your phone down? I'm talking to you.
Yes. Yeah.
Just something simple like that, because it makes you...
It's interesting with social media. With social media, you can have 4 or 5, 6, 7 different conversations going at the same time. Yeah. And one person is, "This is great. This is wonderful." The next person is like, it's just a matter of learning the language. And effective relationships are built on learning language, learning how people work. And so this can be a conflict point too as well. So if I know that you like quality time, so then I stop, give you 5 minutes, okay, now's enough, okay, and then go, it's that we're not connecting. And so we have to learn to be selfless and work on that to have effective relationships in order for us to do that. So physical touch, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and words of affirmation.
And you know what, honey, we talked a little bit about this before we got on here. just because of our own journey, there was a lot of things that I took so personally, and I didn't need to, because you were speaking a different language. You weren't
That's right,
speaking
yeah.
my love language, so I did not feel valued or secure or safe. And
Yeah.
so I was trying to control you.
Yeah.
Because I wanted you to act a certain way. I wanted you to value me in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I was taking everything very personal. But I want to say this. There comes a point where I had to know my value, even if he didn't speak my language. And I had to grow in the value I knew that I was,
Yes.
so that I could actually relax and I didn't have to make you do anything.
Right, and that's kind of going into, we're getting at the 25-minute mark here, and we just want to honor our time together. With these 5, I know we just briefly went through it, because sometimes it's good just to have conversation about these things, because, again, we're wired different, and the hardest thing in the world to work with is when you're not on the same page. That doesn't mean we have to be the same. We can be different but still be on the same page. And that's why I think relationships are so important, because we are going to be different, yet we're going to be the same. And so dealing with relationships that's a fundamental reality. And again, we've talked about that before. That's where conflict often happens, is because we don't know what the other person's language is, or we don't speak the other person's language. We can have a great heart, our motive can be right, but if they don't understand, or if we don't know their language, there's going to be a language barrier.
That's right.
And if you want to work and have effective relationships, we're going to have to work on that.
Yeah.
Yes, expectations deal with that, communication and trust and personalities, but also what we see is most valuable, and we have to build that in there. We want to just leave you 2 things to pull away from this that might help you compute some of this stuff or process some of the stuff. And so what do we take away from something like this? The first thing I think we have to take away is we have to, 1, purpose relationships. We have to purpose. We have to put in the investment, because great relationships don't happen by themselves.
Yeah, not by chance.
And many times I think I just assume that. I just assume it'll just naturally happen. Yes, there's moments in your life where you really connect with someone, and it just seems to really, especially if you speak the same language.
Oh.
There's a different connection there. There's no work involved. I know how you feel exactly. Why isn't the world like us? And we don't want to create an us and them mentality. We want to create an inclusive system here, or organism.
Organic.
That's organic. And so we have to learn that relationships are purposed. If we expect the others around us just to simply know our language and think like we do, operate like we do, have the same values that we do, that will never ever happen. And as a result of that, then boom.
Yeah. I had something written down here, because of sometimes the lack of knowing the other person's
Yes.
language. You need to say something. If you need to say something, then say it.
Yes. Don't assume.
If you're missing something, ask for it.
Yeah.
If you're hurt, let them know.
Yes.
There's gonna have to be a vulnerability.
Right.
Saying, this is how I feel valued.
I think when we were going through our conflict was because we first of all didn't know how to speak each other's language. And we made a lot of assumptions as a result of that. And instead of sitting down and talking about them, we just made assumptions. And we went through so many years just assuming, and we crashed and hit and banged and had traffic accidents and all kinds of stuff because we didn't take the time to purpose relationships. And when we stopped and took a step back, when we learned to stop controlling each other because we expected them to think like us and have the same language, speak the same languages as us, when we recognize that doesn't work no matter how sincere you can be. But the moment we took a step back and said, okay, what do you value? Okay, this is where I was hurt. This is what didn't work. And that's where our relationship with God comes in so important, is because He helps us walk along that. He created us for relationships, and as a result of that creating of relationships, He has the solutions. But again, they don't come automatically. They're purposed. It's like building the house that we talked about a few sessions ago and things like that. So when we stop trying to change other people, we begin to create an atmosphere of safety.
That was huge, because you said
Yes.
before when we were just talking about this before, honey, and I said, well, when did it change for you? How did we
Yes.
get through that?
Mm-hmm.
And you said, when you stopped trying to control me, like to try to.
Because every time you would bring something up that I was not doing, I felt like a failure.
Yeah.
And when that keeps happening over and over, and that can happen in marriage, it can happen at work, because if you're always told by your employer that you're not doing well, always pointing what's wrong, and you're an affirmation type of language speaker, a child, and you keep telling your child all the time what they're doing wrong, you don't affirm what they're doing, you always bring it, what it does is it creates, they don't feel safe. And usually when people aren't safe, they pull back, and as a result, they put up walls. So when we stop trying to change people, we create a safety for allowing them to be who they are. But we have to purpose that relation. We have to purpose relationship. Every time I felt like I wasn't doing enough, failure was written over my mind. And because I was looking for something specific and I wasn't getting it because the language was not the same.
Yeah.
When you don't have a healthy value for yourself, it adds to the breakdown.
Oh, it does.
When I felt like I was a failure and I was never reaching people's expectations, and all I was told that I was not, it just reaffirmed how I already felt about myself. But when we can feel good about ourselves and who we are, that changes the playing field. Then we're not apt to take things personally right away as we normally do. The second thing we want to leave you here as we come to a close is learn to speak other languages. If you want to be effective in relationships, we're going to have to learn to speak other language. Again, I put a little note here. It's not always about us, but about others, and working that through. This can be a real issue in a person's life, and especially when it comes to relationships. You need to know what I think. We have to talk and dialogue about that kind of stuff.
And so ultimately, we are going to have to be willing to grow and learn and cultivate.
That's an aspect of life that's
purpose.
always going to be there. If we're waiting for the other person to do the changing, it's never going to happen. We have to do our trade. It's going to take parking in the parking lot and sitting across the table and working.
Worth the investment.
It is.
Worth the investment.
Absolutely. You
Yes,
betcha.
it is.
Thank you so much for being with us here this evening, Wednesday
Yes.
night. Looks like it's a bit cloudy.
Yeah.
But thank you again for joining us. If you're not watching this live, you're going to tune in later on. We just want to thank you. Honor your time, and we just bless you. Have a great rest of the evening.
Great night,
Bye-bye.
guys. Thanks for joining us.